Hi, folks. Welcome back. Here we are with our next recorded lecture. I'm your instructor, Victor Fabiana Bundesguerra. This is Philosophy 110, Introduction to Philosophy. We're still talking about abortion. We're talking about the Thomson piece. Of course, it is our unit of applied ethics. And we looked at the violinist case, right? Where you wake up and you're plugged into this stranger, to this violinist, and how that is an argument of analogy to pregnancy, essentially, and eventually abortion. So notice, right, that there's many levels to this analogy, right? A kidnapping, a bedridden, death of donor, death of the mother. Um, and it's important. So let's go ahead and jump in here. And it's important to know that pro-lifers, opponents to abortion, don't usually make exceptions in a lot of cases. Regardless, for the first, Thomson doesn't want to say that someone born of rape has less or no right to life. So he's never actually saying, right, that the violinist has no right to life. He's never actually saying that the fetus has no right to life. Sorry, she's never saying that. They are assuming that the fetus is a human. Again, there's an assumption that Thomson is making. And because of that, they use this example with the violinist where they are a human and they do have a right to live. The question is, does this right to live outweigh the right to your body and to be able to give your resources of your body as you see fit, your bodily autonomy? So let's go ahead and look at the extreme pro-life view first, according to her. The extreme view is that abortion is impermissible. You cannot do it, even if giving birth will kill the mother. The first question that we should ask is why? Why should we give preference to the fetus, to the child? Shouldn't it be 50-50? 50-50? Or shouldn't the mother's right to her body tilt the scales 51-49? Why are we preferring the life of the fetus? And opponents, pro-lifers, will say, no, directly killing the fetus is more wrong than indirectly or letting the mother die during childbirth. Of course, there she has a response to this. Thomson says, look, maybe from a third person or bystander perspective, this is true, but not from the mother's perspective. It is not wrong for you personally to favor your own life over someone else's. And it's definitely not wrong for you to favor your own life over the life of a stranger. Because again, you don't know this fetus. They are essentially a stranger to you. You don't know who they are at all. To favor your own life over someone else's is what partially informs self-defense, after all. If, she says, if given the choice to either die right now or have a stranger be killed, would any of us at all, would any besides the most selfless of us, choose to not save ourselves? And if we chose to save ourselves, we wouldn't feel guilty. We wouldn't allow people to accuse us of being unjust. No, we would say, yeah, that was the right thing to do. I want to live, and that type of favoritism and partiality is okay. You might be saying at this point, okay, maybe you yourself can favor yourself, but third-party folks like doctors still can't perform abortions because they themselves have to be impartial. They can't choose one person over another. That would be favoritism. That would be wrong. And her reply is, look, you're lying to yourself. You're deluding yourself that you need to be impartial to begin with. The mother owns the body that the mother needs to live, as well as that the baby needs to live. This is a reason to be partial to the mother. If we look at another example, if Jones steals Smith's coat, which both need to survive, can we do nothing? Probably, we probably can do something, right? We probably can be partial to whoever the coat belongs to, namely Smith. In this case, the body, the resources that they both need to live belong to the mother. So we can be partial to the mother, according to Thomson. What about less extreme views at this point? You might say, okay, women can get abortions, but only if their life is in danger. A human's right to life must outweigh everything. So yes, you can get an abortion, but only if you need the coat to live, only if you need those resources to live. If you don't need it to live, then you can't get it, you might say at this point. At this point, she says, we gotta stop and analyze what a right to life even entails. What does that even mean? Let's suppose that entails a positive right, that someone needs to give you something, namely being given the minimum needs to continue living. Then this doesn't necessarily outweigh everything. A person, after all, may have no right to the cool hand, right? She gives the example of a celebrity and how she would want the cool hand of that celebrity on her forehead, something weird like that. So if you just have the right to be given the minimum needs to continue living, then the minimum needs to continue living may not outweigh uh, your right to your own resources. It may not give you the right to kidneys, to someone's body, to someone's blood system, for instance. Suppose that instead of entailing something positive, right? And if it entailed something positive, there's reasons to be dubious of that according to Thomson. But let's suppose it entails something negative, right? Namely, to not be interfered with, that someone can't take something away from you. Then this doesn't necessarily outweigh the mother's right to her body in this case either. It's a kindness if you let the violinist use your kidneys. You're giving them something. You're not interfering with them, you're letting them use it. And if they start using it without your permission, then now you're still not interfering with them if you take it away, because that was never theirs to begin with. Let's suppose again, it simply entails not to be killed unjustly, where to be killed unjustly means to be deprived of what one has been given a right to. Well, in this case, it's not very clear that abortion is an unjust killing, or Thomson would go stronger and say it's not an unjust killing at all, because the fetus hasn't, in a lot of cases, been given a right to these resources, been given a right to the woman's body, especially in the case of rape. So however we analyze a right to life, whether it's being given something positive, whether it's being given the assurance that you won't be interfered with, or whatever, it's not obvious that in any of these cases, according to her, that it outweighs the right of a woman to her own resources, to her own body. In each of these cases, what is more weighty is a woman's right to her body, according to her. But you might be saying, look, you say that the last thing she said, right? The mother may not give fetus a right to her body, especially in the case of rape. You might say at this point, but a woman does give a fetus a right to her body when she engages in voluntary sex, right? That's a common argument. What about cases of voluntary sex? The last objection goes. If mother knew the consequence of sex, have they not explicitly or implicitly given the fetus a right to life? Did they not invite the fetus inside and then therefore give them the right to their life? She replies is that this is nonsense. This is complete nonsense. This is absurd. If a room is stuffy, let's assume, and you open the window and the burglar climbs in, it would be nonsensical to say, you open the window. Now that burglar can stay because you've given them a right to use your house. For you see, you are partially responsible for the burglar's presence because you fucking opened the window, having voluntarily done what enabled him to get in full knowledge that burglars exist and that sometimes they come in through windows and that burglars steal. So now you can't complain when they steal at all. That would be silly. That would be completely silly to say that. The situation stands that if you have sex, it would be silly to say that someone now can therefore hold you hostage for 9 months. No. It will be even more absurd if you consider that you invested in bars or mesh or screens, which work most of the time, but sometimes fail. In other words, if you invested in contraceptives. If you invested in contraceptives, then it will be even more absurd to say that you gave the fetus a right to your body now. Because, again, contraceptives work most of the time, but sometimes they don't. Because it will be like if you installed a burglar alarm, but then you still somehow opened the window, but even though you had a burglar alarm with that window open. It would be ridiculous. You didn't give the burglar a right to steal anything. So with or without contraceptives, with or without security systems, you don't give a right to the fetus and you don't give a right to the burglar to anything at all. Finally, there is one last objection that sometimes people argue for in terms of pro being pro-life, which is basically the idea that women, mothers in particular, have a special connection to the fetus and a special relationship, and this special relationship requires them to be a good Samaritan, to be kind to the fetus, to their future child. And at this point, she mentions the case of the Kitty Genovese murder in 1964, in which she was pretty brutally murdered, this woman, and there was 38 bystanders that didn't really do anything. Now, there's been a lot of details of the story that have since been come out and been exposed. So keep this in mind. When she was writing this, she didn't know the full story. But still, the 38 bystanders, they weren't sued or accused of anything. There were no minimally decent laws or accusations that can be brought up against these bystanders. They were just adopting the mentality of MYOB, mind your own business. And because they were adopting that mentality, that doesn't give you a right to then sue them. And this woman died because no one did nothing. Yet, she says, we expect mothers to not only be minimally decent to their fetus, not only to be good Samaritans, but we expect them to be saintly, to sacrifice 9 months of their physical health, mental health, and material resources to this stranger who they didn't give a right to use their resources. She says, no motherly bond gives a woman a special responsibility to be a good Samaritan. A woman has not implicitly or explicitly assumed any such responsibility. Being biologically related to the fetus is not an assumption of responsibility at all. Because think of it this way. Would it matter if the violinist that was hooked up to you was your uncle or some distant relative? No, the violinist would still not have access to your body. The conclusion is that just because the fetus is a human, and just because humans have a right to live, that doesn't mean that abortion is wrong. A right to live, a human's right to live, doesn't outweigh another human's right to their own body. Of course, she says, remember, we've only been assuming that fetuses are humans. There is good reason, philosophically speaking, to us think that early fetuses simply aren't. And, that's a whole other conversation in philosophy, whether human fetuses should be considered persons and whether they have self-consciousness or enough intelligence. But that's a different conversation. She's never actually engaged with that. Still, she gives the pro-lifers the benefit of the doubt and says, okay, we'll assume that a fetus is a human and has a right to live, but even giving you that doesn't mean abortion is wrong. So she's being quite kind here to pro-lifers, giving them a very important premise that they need, and she still thinks that their argument fails pretty badly. With that said, what do you think? Do you think her analogy holds? Do you think her argument is good? That's it for today, folks. This does conclude our unit on applied ethics, I believe. With that said, I'll see you folks next time. Bye-bye.